Welcome to the Mean Lady Talking Podcast. This is the podcast that tackles tough questions about relationships, life, love, and loss. It may not be the advice you want, but is probably the advice you need. And now here's your host, grief therapist, motivational speaker, relationship expert, best-selling author, and attorney, the not really mean lady herself, Susan J. Elliott.
Good day, everybody. This is Susan Elliott, host of the Mean Lady Talking Podcast. And I want to let you guys know that I did a poll of the Facebook group, and I asked people to vote for what kind of boot camp they wanted to see next. I have a GPYB boot camp going at the moment. It's going to end on March 17th, and the new boot camp is going to start the first week of April by a margin of 3-1, which was pretty significant. People said that they wanted a codependency boot camp, which I don't normally offer more than once a year. And some years I don't offer it at all. So I decided, I asked them for a vote, and that's what they did. My codependency boot camps are not cookie cutter. I definitely take the needs and the wants and exactly the work that they need to do of my boot campers into consideration. Most of my codependency boot camps have either had clients or people that have been in other boot camps or something to that effect. They've also had people very new to GPYB because codependency is something that runs through a lot of people's relationships and ultimately their breakups. And codependents find NC very difficult, and they find moving on to be very difficult. So I am going to post this podcast on March 1st. So I am going to be posting this on March 1st, 2019. And if you sign up for the Codependency Bootcamp, use a code podcast 35 for the day that the early bird podcast discount ends for 15%. If you're a GPYB alum, don't use that. Use GPYB alum as your discount code because that's good for another 5%. So if you want to sign up for it, send email to susan@gettingpastyourbreakup.com. And if you're listening to this sometime after March of 2019, if it's before April 2019, you want to join the boot camp, you can write me to see if there's possibly a wait list or an opening. The codependency bootcamp usually sells out very quickly. So I don't know exactly when it will sell out. And I might hold back 1 or 2 spots. Sometimes I slide an extra person in there. But because we do 2-hour calls and everybody should get a chance to share. And I will tell you that at the very beginning, we'll do a 2-hour call. And chances are we will end before 2 hours. Within a few weeks, when people start to get to know each other and they start really opening up in their journals, then we're talking our faces off. Last week, I had to split the group for the first time. We had to split the phone calls. We just could not get everybody on the same call. No matter how many times I tried, I was going crazy trying to figure out one time slot where everybody was available for 2 hours. It just wasn't happening. So I split them. Some people attended both calls, but I think there was only 2 or 3 people that were on both calls. But each call went 2 hours, so that was 4 hours. In the beginning, the first couple of weeks, we never got to 2 hours. So it evolves, and you will absolutely bond with your fellow boot campers. It's amazing. I love watching it happen because I know you guys are going to have friends for life. If you look at the stories in the back of Getting Back Out There, one of the stories is Annie and Tony. Annie came to GPYB she didn't know anybody. She just came and she was just trying to get over a breakup, and she became friends with 2 people, and they followed her story. They went through her breakup. They went through her meeting someone new that was kind of an accident. Read the story in Getting Back Out There. I will give you an update on all the people that I wrote about. And every single couple, except one, I think, had a child or children. Annie and Tony had two beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sons. Candace and Hank had a gorgeous son. And Martin and Maya, after three girls, had a gorgeous son who is going to be so spoiled by his sisters. Oh my goodness. They live in the Philippines, but they travel all over the world. Maya homeschools the girls, and if she wants to teach them about Paris, she brings them to Paris. I mean, I'm talking about people who have beautiful, full, wonderful lives. All the people that I write about in the stories of Getting Back Out There have such wonderful, wonderful stories, and a lot of people from GPYB become friends for life. So the two people from the blog and from seminars and boot camps went to Annie's wedding, and they wrote back to me and they said, really good guy. You would really, really like him. And everything I heard about him was absolutely wonderful. And Annie actually had a problem with an unemployment claim, and she called me and asked me for some legal advice. And she was doing the telephone discussion, and I gave her kind of the script to use for when she placed this unemployment claim, and she prevailed. It was wonderful. Any of the people that I wrote about in Getting Back Out There, and that book was written in 2012. It came out in 2015, but it was written in 2012. All of those stories, everyone is still going strong. Everyone. And babies have been born and weddings have gone on, and it's just wonderful. And I want you to read those stories and Getting Back Out There. You can have that. Anyway, if you join a boot camp, you will have friends for life. You will have a built-in support system that you know is absolutely equal because you met in a place that when you were open and vulnerable and hurting, and these other people are part of the group that carries you, that helps you. And in boot camps, I tell people that the most important thing is the give and take of support, because as somebody who is going to be a 3 a.m. person is going to look for a 3 a.m. person, and I'll get into that in a minute, you know that you have to learn how to talk to people, how to be there for people, how to communicate. You have to be able to communicate your wants and needs, and you have to be able to listen to somebody else's wants and needs. And that's what people learn in boot camp. And in codependency boot camp, you really have to break the enabling that you've done, the controlling that you've done. You might not even think it's controlling, but when you're taking care of somebody else's responsibilities and they're not taking care of them themselves, it's codependency and it's control. You are controlling the outcome. Codependency started as co-alcoholism. It started in the halls of Al-Anon, where they would call the spouses of alcoholics co-alcoholics because the behaviors are very similar, or many times the co-alcoholic was even crazier than the alcoholic. I remember my father would drink and he would come in with just the smell of a beer on his breath. You couldn't tell if the man had one beer or 25 beers. Just couldn't tell. He was soft-spoken. He was passive-aggressive. I will give my mother that. My father was definitely passive-aggressive. He would natter at her, and I don't know if I've done a podcast on this or not, but my mother was the person who did all the carpentry, and she was a master carpenter, self-taught master carpenter, self-taught electrician, self-taught plumber, and I saw her in the Bronx, her go into the basement and pull a pipe apart, a major pipe under the house. And we had city water and city sewer, but she went in there and she cleaned that pipe out herself. I don't even know how she did it. I saw her do it with a septic system in Putnam County, New York. I saw her do this, but she was underneath the sink. We were in the Bronx. I was probably about 10, 11 years old. And she's under the sink with this giant plumber's wrench. And my mother was smaller than me, and I'm 5'1" and about 110 pounds, and my mother was smaller than me. So she's under the sink, and she's got this huge plumber's wrench, and she's going back and forth. And my father is sitting at the dining room table, which was almost a room away, but he had a bird's eye view into the kitchen. She's under the sink. He's not getting up from his chair. He's sitting there smoking a cigarette, and he's telling her, a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left. And he would call it Toots or the Fox because he would say that she was sly as a fox, and she had a nose, so she was always being able to figure out what was going on. Andy's sitting there, and he'd be like, "Hey, Fox, a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left." He had an accent like Archie Bunker. In fact, people thought that Norman Lear had met my father and styled Archie Bunker after him because he had the white hair, and my father's hair turned white when he was still in his 20s. Could have been World War II, but he wore that uniform, the white shirt, the black pants, the white socks, and the black shoes that Archie Bunker wore all the time. That was my father's uniform. That was what he always wore. You never saw him in anything. I don't ever remember my father wearing anything else. If you look at the years that All in the Family was on, you wouldn't see Carol O'Connor wearing anything else. You wouldn't see my father wearing anything else. So he's sitting there, and he's telling my mother a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, maybe you should try this, maybe you should try that, not helping her, just sort of barking suggestions at her. And she comes up from underneath that sink, and I knew it. I mean, I knew it before anything happened. As soon as I saw her tense up and sit up straight, I knew he's done for. She took that plumber's wrench and she hurled it from the kitchen, from sitting on the floor, from a sitting position, and into the dining room. Almost killed the man. I mean, I saw her throw other things at him. I saw her throw a full urn of scalding hot coffee at him. She threw bowls. She threw all kinds of things, not only at him, but at us too. So if you would ask me, my mother was the crazy person, okay? My father was the alcoholic. My mother was the crazy codependent. And my father was a workaholic. He worked 2 jobs all the time, 3 jobs in the summer. And my mother was the one that kept everything moving, kept everything going. And she would work, she would iron our clothes, she would cook our meals, she would do everything. And then she would rage and carry on with us and with my father. It was basically the way that co-alcoholics / codependents would work. So there was also something that I remembered from going to an Al-Anon meeting when I had my homicidal boyfriend in. As a teenager, he would lure me back with promises of getting sober in AA. He was only 17, and he's going to AA. And so his sponsor's wife took me to Al-Anon. And I remember sitting in Al-Anon, and somebody says, when couples get into recovery, the drinker goes to AA and the non-drinker goes to Al-Anon. You could always tell who was the co-alcoholic because they always look worse than the alcoholic. The alcoholic was preserved in alcohol. And I would think not just in alcohol, but in carefreeness, because they would just shirk off all their responsibilities. But sometime in the 1970s, late 1970s, 1980s, they came to realize that there were plenty of people who had these co-alcoholic traits and tendencies who had not been around alcoholics, but maybe they'd been raised by people who had been raised by alcoholics, or maybe they had been in a long-term relationship with an alcoholic and they became codependent because that set of coping mechanisms would arise from being in a relationship with an alcoholic. And if you're not healthy and you're trying to save somebody else, you don't know that you don't have good boundaries. You don't know that this is not stuff you're supposed to do. And the thing that codependents will always say is, "Oh, but I care. I'm a good person. I have a good heart. I just care. I want to help. I want to fix. I want to do this. I want to do that." And that's garbage. It's garbage. If you have a good heart, if you want to help people, go to a soup kitchen. Go to an animal shelter. Do something like that. Don't keep picking up losers on the street to have relationships with. Anyway, so the word codependent evolved from co-alcoholic. And there has been many people who push back on the term codependent because they will say, well, it's not in the DSM. And I don't know if it was in the DSM if people would still cop to it, or they would say, oh, it's just a pop psychology term. It doesn't really mean anything. No, it means a lot. There is an actual set of behaviors that codependents have, and I'll get into those in a minute. But there has been raging debate over putting codependency in the personality disorder section. And like I said, I'm going to be doing a class on personality disorders, not just the B clusters, which is what we tend to talk about, which is the narcissism, the antisocial personality, borderline personality, histrionic personality disorder. But the C cluster involves a personality disorder called dependent personality disorder. And many people think that codependency belongs there. But there is a world of difference between people with dependent personality disorder and people who are codependent. And I don't think that codependency is a personality disorder at all, because I'll tell you why. Most personality disorders are very hard to recover from. And I know that people will say, I'm a recovering alcoholic, I'm a recovering drug addict, because the standard way of thinking is that you cannot recover. There is no cure for alcoholism. There is no cure for drug addiction. All you could do is go into remission of having an active disease. But I know that I am a recovered codependent. I am not recovering codependent. Every now and again, I will recognize that I'm behaving from a codependent place, but I will pull back and I will decide that's not okay, that's not good, I need to be doing something else. But I am definitely a recovered codependent. I am not a recovering codependent. I am recovered. Anyway, so in the 1980s, there became a slew of people who were rushing to write about codependency. And codependency are learned traits. They're learned disordered traits. And when I say disordered in terms of codependency, I am not talking about a personality disorder. I'm just talking about a disorder. You can have plenty of disorders without being personality disordered. I remember when I went into therapy and my therapist first introduced me to the idea of codependency, she said to me, you are not a human doing. You are a human being. She said, you have been trying to run the universe and it doesn't work. And I've talked about how my ex would call me up and he would say, oh, my grandmother came up here from New York and she came up to take care of the kids. And you don't care about her. You haven't brought the kids to see her. What's wrong with you? And I basically hung up the phone and ran to her house to pick her up. And now this man, my husband, we were estranged at the time, and I was staying with my mother and the kids, and he was supposedly staying with his grandmother. I get to her house, and she is in bad physical shape. And I immediately take her to the hospital. Now I've got her and 3 kids. I was at the hospital all night. Did my ex call me and say, oh my God, thank you so much for taking my grandmother to the hospital? That was wonderful. But no, of course not. Of course not. So I went to my therapist and I told her I'd been at the hospital all night. The kids were cranky. I couldn't keep them quiet. I couldn't leave because I didn't know where he was. And the only number that I had for him was her house and nobody was there. So I told my therapist all this and she said, well, why did you take her? And then I explained the conversation. She said, so who cares? She said, it's his kids, his grandmother, let him take her. And I went, what? That had never crossed my mind. And that's one of the things we do in Codependency Boot Camp. People will come to me with these situations. They don't have the words. I didn't have the words. So I said to her, well, what should I have said? And she said, well, you should have said, they're your kids and your grandmother, you take them. And I said, but he wasn't even home. And when I got there, she was so sick, she would have died. And my therapist, and this might sound heartless and cruel and terrible, she said, that wouldn't be your problem. And I went, what? Truly, I had no idea that that was not my problem. And it seems cruel and it seems heartless to say that wouldn't be your problem, but it was true. It wouldn't be my problem. And I had to stop saying how high when he said jump. And I had to sit back and I had to think about whose problem is this? Who owns this problem? And this is what I tell people in Codependency Boot Camp all the time. You have to think about whose problem is this? Stop and think. We do lots on observation. We do lots of hold it, stay there. Figure it out. What's the issue? What's the problem? What do you need in order to make a good decision as to whether or not you should go and be with this woman, take her to the hospital, do whatever? In Getting Past Your Breakup, I talk in the boundary section about the woman whose friend was always late going to the movies, and she always missed the beginning of the movies. And half the time she didn't know what was going on in the movie because her friend couldn't seem to show up on time. And I had to give her the words. This is what you say, and then this is what you do. Because it's a learned disorder, and you have to unlearn it. Whether it comes from a dysfunctional relationship, a dysfunctional family life, or just from being in relationships with the wrong people over a long period of time because you've had low self-esteem. At the heart of every codependent is low self-esteem. very bad boundaries, and an inability to figure out who owns what and to make other people responsible for what they're actually responsible for. I tell parents, stop putting the pillow in front of the wall when your teenager or your spouse or whomever is about to crash into the wall. Stop being the person who saves them from themselves. Let them crash into the wall. Take the pillow away. Stop being responsible for what other people are ultimately responsible for. This goes back to the old-fashioned, the husband's drunk, he's hungover, he can't go to work, and the wife calls the boss and says, oh, he's got the stomach flu, blah, 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 blah. No, I understand that you might need the paycheck, but at some point you have to make people responsible for what they're responsible for. I tell the story. My daughter was in the 6th grade. Now, my sons were all grown and out of school. My daughter was in the 6th grade. I was getting ready for work. The phone rings, and she says to my son, is Mom there? And he says, yeah, why? And she says, I forgot my folder. Can you please ask her to bring it up to school? And he started laughing. He said, are you new here? He said, I'm not going to ask her this. She said, I'm going to get in trouble. And he said, well, too bad, so sad, because that's what Mom's going to say. He comes into my room, and I was like, what was that? And he told me what it was, and I laughed, and he laughed, and I went to work, and my daughter got in trouble for not having a folder. And guess what? She never forgot a folder again. One time she forgot it, and it was no surprise. I was not bringing her folder to school. It was her problem. I talk about having gone to the Don Dinkmeyer classes on effective parenting many, many, many years before and learning about logical and natural consequences. A natural consequence is if you forget your umbrella and you go out into the rain, you're going to get wet. That's a natural consequence. A logical consequence is you forget your folder at home, you get in trouble at school. That's a logical consequence that follows from your action. Codependents cannot let others suffer the logical or natural consequences of their actions. They keep saving people from themselves, and they never learn because they learn that you're going to be there to bail them out time and time again. You have to learn to stop, and it's very hard. And I know that codependents have a very tough time with it. But codependents tend to be exhausted because they're running around behind everybody cleaning up their messes and they're not being appreciated. So they're emotionally exhausted, they're mentally exhausted, sometimes they're physically exhausted, sometimes they're financially exhausted. They just do. And that's what my therapist said to me. You are not a human doing. You're a human being. Slow the hell down. Stop taking care of everybody else and take care of yourself. And if you remember from all my other podcasts, my husband gave me credit for absolutely nothing. So, of course, I didn't have a view of myself as somebody who was doing for everybody else because I was constantly being told what I didn't do. So I was all screwed up in the head. I encourage recovering codependents to journal every day. Work on your affirmations, work on your boundaries, and try to figure out what different scenarios you find yourself in over and over again that tends to blow up in your face. When you help other people, when you help people find jobs, when you bail people out, when you run errands for people, when you call the boss, when you say they can't come in today because they're really sick, when you don't know where the hell they are, what the hell it is they're really doing. You have to learn when you're a recovering codependent exactly who is responsible for what and how difficult it is to let people that you love fall on their face, but that's exactly what you need to do. And it's not about making them responsible because they could go around find another codependent just like you to take care of them. And I see this in court in the baby mama cases all the time. And I've talked about this. So you see two women, they are keying each other's cars, they're egging each other's houses, they're doing all kinds of crazy crap to each other because Romeo has basically pitted them against each other, has said, okay, well, you won't take care of me, I'll go over to her house. Wrong. Let her have him. If this is the way he or she is going to be. Let them have each other. It's absolutely ridiculous for you to not let them have each other. Why are these ladies fighting? I see them in court, and I'll be sitting there as a lawyer. I'll be sitting there with someone else. I'm either there as a divorce coach or I'm there as a lawyer, and I'll be sitting there and I'll be thinking, I just want to go up to them and go, this is crazy. Let him go and go figure yourself out and stop picking on the woman. She doesn't owe you anything. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to your children. You don't owe it to this guy who is basically sitting there like, oh, look at the ladies fighting over me. Isn't this sexy? No, it's not sexy. It's pathetic and horrible. And don't do it. Ladies, don't do it. You have to get comfortable with having normal limits and boundaries. That's so important. It's so important for you to understand what you can say no to and that you say no to it. The reason why I care so much about codependence is because I know that they are the most giving, loyal, loving people in the world, but because of their low self-esteem, their lack of boundaries, and their inability to separate responsibility of what belongs to whom and who belongs to what, they get themselves into all kinds of emotional, physical, financial trouble. And they're left behind by people who just use them up and spit them out. And I know that at the heart of every codependent is a really good person who just wants to be loved, but doesn't know how to go about being loved for who and what they are. They feel the need to rescue people. They feel the need to do things for other people all the time. Like they have to punch a clock in order to be cared for, in order to be loved. And you don't. You don't have to punch a clock. You don't have to do for others. You don't. You have the right to just be loved for who and what you are, not for what you do for other people. But when you take responsibilities away from codependents, they get very nervous. They get very anxious, like, oh my God, what are you doing? A lot of times when I talk to my boot campers who are in codependency boot camp, I talk to my clients who are recovering codependence, and I say, I want you to do less of this and less of this and less of this. You can almost see the panic in their faces. Like, if I don't do that, what am I going to do? It's like the codependent is the one who's here to save the day. And if you take that away from them, what do they have to do? I'll tell you what they have to do. They have to work on their self-esteem. They have to work on their boundaries. They have to work on building their own life. There are so many different ways of doing that. You have to let go of rescuing other people and rescue yourself. Save yourself before it's too late. You are a human being, not a human doing. You have to learn to say no. You also have to learn to say, I made a mistake. I was wrong. I'm sorry. One thing that I couldn't do when I was an active codependent is say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Because I was so afraid of people throwing it in my face because I was surrounded by crazy people who were just trying to trip me up, who were just trying to see what could they get me to say. Many codependents feel like they have to be doing something all the time. And many times they're controlling people and they don't see what they're doing as control. They see it as helping. I'm helping. I'm a good person. I have a good heart. No. Helping. Yeah, right. No, that is not it. You cannot be a 3 a.m. person and you cannot get a 3 a.m. person if you don't know healthy communication, healthy boundaries, healthy self-esteem. And in boot camp, I have people. This is how you work through being in so much emotional pain and working through it and helping someone else at the same time. You cannot keep it if you don't give it away. You have to be able to do both. And when I teach people in boot camp how to support somebody else, I'm teaching them a model for how healthy functional relationships work. It's give and take, give and take, give and take. And I say to people, if you're overwhelmed with the amount of work that you have to do and the amount of support you have to give other people, it's time to pull back and deal with self-care. We learn that in boot camp because many times people will say, oh my goodness, like I'm just so overwhelmed. I have to work. I have to do this. I have to do that. And I go, okay, calm down. Calm down. I don't want anybody screwing themselves into the ground, especially codependents, because you need to learn when to pull back. So I tell people, if you feel overwhelmed, if you feel like you're giving too much, codependents absorb other people's feelings, other people's problems, other people's situations. situations. So I say, if you're reading somebody's journal and it's really triggering you, it's time to stop reading and pull back and take care of you. You have to learn the signs. You have to learn the signal. I talk about one of the guys that I worked with. He was a private client of mine. He had signed up for the 12-week Getting Past Your Breakup. We had done a lot of work together. He was a doctor. He was fairly well off, but he had taken his girlfriend all over the place on trips. Anything she wanted, he did for her. He was a really good guy. Codependent to the max. And all he wanted was a thank you. A thank you. And she said to him that she wouldn't give him the thank you because he asked for it. She said, you get it when I'm ready to give it. But he said she never gave it. So that's something that people that want to take advantage of codependents will do. They will gaslight them. They'll twist their heads all the way around. And I said, well, that's ridiculous, because there were many times where you didn't ask for it and you didn't get it. So she's full of baloney. So all he wanted was a thank you. And so I had other people at the exact same time who had very similar stories. They had given blood, sweat, tears, money, time, responsibility, everything to their partner, who basically turned and walked away. See ya. Oh, you want a thank you from me? Oh, frig you. Thank you. Like I'm going to give you a thank you. I mean, these people are outrageous, absolutely outrageous to say something like that. Oh, you want to thank you? Well, the hell with you, I'm leaving. That is so bad. And they don't see anything wrong with that. And the codependent's going, wait. Okay, I take it back. I don't need a thank you. Just stay. Please stay. No. I want you to think about the fact that is just not okay. So when this guy came to me, I offered an online codependency boot camp. It was the first time I ever did it. And this guy lived out west. The other people in the boot camp lived all over the country. There was a couple of people that lived outside of the United States. And I was like, oh my goodness. I had resisted doing online stuff because I really liked the personal aspect of meeting people face to face. But once I started doing Skype and later Zoom, I saw that it was so great. In that first codependency boot camp, I had at least 4 people who identified with that guy. And he came in and he did the boot camp. And I heard from him a few months later. He was dating somebody who was really nice and wonderful and knew enough to say thank you. Oh my goodness, a civilized person. Yes, a civilized person. Because I had pushed him to have expectations of other people, to do his standards and compatibility inventory long before getting back out there came out. And everybody in that group grew and changed and had boundaries and better self-esteem and went on to better relationship. I did a webinar a couple of years ago, and I talked about being in court one day, and I was consulting on the divorce case because the woman's ex was totally personality disordered, and her attorney did not understand personality disorders. And so I came in as a consulting lawyer, and I'm sitting there with my client, and I'm listening to this case in front of me, and this woman comes in and she says that she met this guy as he was coming out of prison. He didn't have a job, he didn't have a driver's license, and he had all these fines. So she helped him out, get on his feet, and I'm telling you, any woman who is interested in a guy who's either in prison or just getting out of prison has severe problems, ladies. There are plenty of guys out here. They might be losers, but they don't have prison records. You don't need to be with a loser with a prison record. You could always find a loser without a prison record. So she decided that he was a good guy. I don't know how she decided that. He hadn't said anything that would have convinced me he was a good guy. And she paid the fine. She helped him get a job. She let him move in with her. Let him move in with her and her kids. Ladies, are you nuts? Anybody who lets somebody that you don't know and who just got out of prison into your house with your kids, that is really irresponsible parenting. That's really over the top, and that needs to not happen. I'm listening to this woman, and she said, I invested in him. This is what she tells the judge, and the judge is nodding, and I'm like, I'm trying to stay in my seat. I'm not even this woman's lawyer or this woman's therapist or this woman's anything, and I want to jump up and say, Your Honor, excuse me, can I take over from here? So I wanted to say that is the most codependent statement I've ever heard. People are not things to invest in. And potential is not something you want to hitch your wagon to. That is not a star that's taking off anytime soon. You don't marry potential, you don't date potential, and you don't invest in people. You invest in stocks and bonds. And you only invest in other people who are willing and have the means to invest in you. And I'm not just talking money, I'm talking about emotional support, mental support, bringing something to the table. This guy brought absolutely nothing to the table. And she's like, oh, here, let me give you this, let me give you that, let me do this, and let me do that. Let me help them out, let me figure it out, let me go to bat for you, let me lend you money, let me get you a car, let me pay for your DWI. Whatever it is, codependents like to rush in, take charge, and solve all the problems, and they think that when they do, the other person is going to be so appreciative, so grateful. They are not. And if you're a codependent sitting out there, you know that they are not grateful because they feel the manipulation. And I've talked about this before. Robin Norwood said, when we give and give to other people without expecting anything in return, it amounts to emotional manipulation, and the other person feels it, and eventually they flee. People intuitively push back on being manipulated, even when the manipulation is in form of gifts that you're just showering them with. They just go, oh, you know what? See you later. Anyway, this is part A of this codependency series. In part B, I'm going to give you a list of codependent traits, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about codependency. So if you think you have a problem with codependency, or you know someone who does, stay tuned. Part B coming right up. Remember, guys, rate and review, rate and review, rate and review. Thanks a lot. Take care, all. Bye-bye.